one. Hey, everybody, welcome to another round of the Game Addicted Show covering college football highlights actually, not highlights, the rankings. I'm tired. I'm delirious. As you guys know, I am severely sleep deprived. And, just having a hard time functioning here. But we're getting through it. We're getting through it okay. Um, But yeah, since my time is limited, I try to sneak in a little bit of time here to go into these rankings. Make sure if you're watching on YouTube, follow me on Twitch. This is my main platform. This is where I think it opens up live discussions where we could break down any team you want to, where we could go, why your team's the best, why is it the worst. And yeah, if you are on Twitch and you miss any of these videos, I transfer them over to my YouTube channel. So any archive footage you want like to see, feel free to check me out there. But that being said, let's jump to this week's rankings because I'm really excited. I added a brand new metric, which I've had, and I use it personally, but there's a part that I'm always trying to convey on here that I don't think really comes through, and I think visualizing this will help. And that is these metrics of showing basically the value of games when of like how valuable they are as a win and how valuable they are as a loss. So jumping into the week 9 rankings, I'm gonna highlight a team that we don't normally jump right into teams that aren't in the top 25 right away, but I'm just trying to find Coastal Carolina here. No, they're in the Sun Belt. Here we go. So Coastal Carolina. I always like to bring up the importance of the value of wins, and this I think is a good chance to show how important it is to consider the value of the quality of each one of your wins. I think this is a good job conveying things because as we've seen in the rankings, I think Coastal Carolina went up to number 14, and in my rankings, even though they were close and they slowly started dropping, I kept mentioning it's like, well, if you value Coastal Carolina, which plays has the 126th worst strength schedule, 129th worst strength of production, but yet you value them so high in the rankings over teams like SMU, over San Diego State, over UTSA, over all these schools. What's the logic behind that, right? And from the rankings perspective, from the AP pools, I really couldn't tell you, but from here, I have the math, to show, and that was one last thing I want to say on that is that I always said that with these teams that play like really weak schedules that are slowly climbing up because each one of these wins have value. In this case, we have a value of 3.93. You multiply that times the number of wins, and also subtract their loss, and that gives you the score 17.99. That's what this. These numbers really shouldn't mean anything to you, but to me, that's it's kind of like giving the team a grade. And basically, the more points you have, the higher grade is. But with Coastal Carolina, they dropped, and they dropped out of the rankings. They dropped 8 spots, and they're ranked number 27. So I thought this would show good visual. A team that is still in the top 25, but kicked out of the top 25 in the VPI rankings here. But I just kind of wanted to highlight them because a team like this is a good example of why some teams in these rankings might surprise you that are as high as they are. And a lot of them are small schools, so we'll jump into that. But just want to bring attention to that. But that being said, let's jump into our actual VPI rankings. First, we're going to start off with Houston. Houston not being on anybody's map. Looking on here, they are receiving a few votes, but looks like they're just outside top 25. Here they actually are. They had a rough start. Not a terrible loss, as you can see, against Texas Tech. Actually, it was a pretty bad loss. Not a bad loss. 6.9 is not a terrible loss. But racking up 6 games straight and just slowly climbing up that ladder, making it into our top 25. That's where they're here. One stat that surprises me, obviously I don't follow Houston, but I mean, for all the years when Kevin Sumlin and I don't know who the coach before him was there, playing in those, going five wide, spread them out offenses, just slinging the ball all over the place. It surprises me that the script has been flipped and it's actually their defense that's carrying them and their offense that seems to be holding them back, like 92nd versus fourth defense in the nation. So that's a pretty interesting statistic. But yeah, Cougars climbing up, just doing a great job overall. Really, not much to say. I don't really follow Houston, so I don't have much on that. But moving on to the Big Ten, continuing to have such a strong year. Every year they're so strong. I don't know if they're undervalued, but and technically SEC is a better conference like so far this year. I think previous years they've been given that title, even though I don't think they earned it. But still really strong showing by the Big Ten. We have Minnesota. Now Minnesota has been quietly putting together a good season, 5-2. Let's see here. They are not ranked in the top 25, but they actually should be. Yeah, they only have one vote. And it's their strength of schedule is great, 36. Strength production top 10, so that's telling us that teams they're playing have some high-powered offenses and defenses cumulatively. So their VPI per game is high, and anything in the close to 7 range is a high score. But also, some tough losses there. I think Bowling Green was lost probably hurt the most, and Ohio State. Obviously it's Ohio State. Great team. So that really shouldn't hurt them. But yeah, moving up to number 24 here, and I think if they continue to win, that'll reflect also in the AP polls. But yeah, I mean, it's the Big Ten being as strong as it is. Does not surprise me at all that Minnesota is finally in the top 25. I think it's well deserved. Moving on to number 23, a team that in week 1 when Texas beat Louisiana, I mentioned how big of a win that was because I think Louisiana's been really underrated, and they continue to be. They are receiving quite a few votes in the AP polls, but just probably one or two more wins away from reaching top 25 there, but they are in top 25 here. But yeah, aside from their loss against Texas, which again Texas I feel for even though they're 4-3 is a bit underrated, that wasn't a bad loss, and yeah, they've racked up 6 straight. The biggest win seems to be against Appalachian State, but yeah, strength schedule, not good. Strength production, not good. But again, I think this is a great contrast because if we contrast the quality of wins here, we have Minnesota who's only 5 wins, but those wins have a score of almost 7 points, right? Where Louisiana is about 4.5 points, but they have 1 more win. So that's what I'm saying is, have each win having a value. If you have more games and you have more wins, so you played let's say 1 or 2 more games with another opponent, it'll help you in the rankings. And there's one team, we'll get into when we get to the top 5, that's really going to show how this works, because there's one team that I think is really overrated, that is that really should be falling off the map. They're only a top 5 team because they're winning, but really don't have the resume that people think they do. But anyways, for Louisiana, well respected, should be a top 25 team, and probably will be if they continue to win. But yeah, racking out 6 straight, a really, really good team. Next, moving into a team that wasn't ranked, is now back in with BYU. They've moved into top 25s in the AP polls, number 25, and with the win they had over Washington State, which again, I always want to stress how tough of a strength of schedule BYU has. Had they not laid an egg against Boise State and then Baylor, and Baylor was a tough loss, they should absolutely be in the college playoff conversations. But yeah, look at this strength schedule: 27, strength production 38. I mean, they beat another Power 5 school. God, that win over Baylor, or a win over Baylor, would have been huge. Not dropping the ball against Boise State, but yeah. even though West State is not a good win technically, their best win of the season is actually against Utah State. But yeah, Boise State BYU just killing it this season. So I wouldn't be surprised with they still have USC on the map with I think two other schools. I think Arkansas State. I have to check, but yeah, definitely has a schedule and plenty of games left to keep climbing up. I think they're a really really good team. Maybe not BCS Buster, not now, but could have been. Absolutely could have been. Moving on to a team that really surprises me, that still continues not to be in the top 25, especially after winning 7 straight and unfortunately beating us with Fresno State. Fresno State has, I understand they have a weak strength of schedule and weak strength of production, but those wins add up. And look at here, even lower, this 4.14 score is even lower than Louisiana, but again, it's 7 wins versus Louisiana 6 wins. Those wins add up, so each game has value, and we're saying that Fresno State has won enough games compared to other teams that are being ranked against that they deserve to be in the top 25, and winning 7 straight says a lot. Even though a lot of those wins are a little questionable. 3 of those are pretty gimmies against UConn and Division II school and UNLV, but that UCLA win cannot be understated, and also coming this close to pulling an upset over Oregon. So Fresno State, absolutely deserves to be top 25 team. So really surprised they're not. Pittsburgh moving at staying at number 20. I don't think they really moved from last week, but big win over Clemson. Clemson, the darling of the ACC, but Pittsburgh is basically ending any hopes of Clemson really doing anything at this point. I think Clemson was already at the playoff conversation, but this pretty much killed it. But yeah, quietly putting together a good season. They are 6-1, number 20 here. Let's see where they're at in number 17. So only 3 spots behind in the AP polls. I'm not going to split hairs there. I think that's a close enough ranking what I'm calculating versus what the AP poll has them. So absolutely fair ranking. But Pittsburgh doing great this season. The mighty SEC, right? I'm not saying that Texas A&M shouldn't be, top 25 team, or, I understand there's about a 5-spot difference, but this is one thing that always annoys me, and a big reason why I even created, this database to look at this. It's because the SEC is notorious for always being overrated. We're gonna go through each ranking here, and we'll see how many times what I'm calculating versus what the AP polls, or even when the playoff committee polls come out, how many times the SEC is ranked higher than what I have. So there's only and it's always their weaker schools on the bottom end that when they get in the top 25 aren't respected. So we're gonna see right now how that works out. So looking at this, we have Texas A&M again, ranked number 19, 14 in the AP polls. In a lot of ways they do deserve to be ranked this high, where they have a top 20, number 22 strength schedule, number 12 strength production, VPI, the per game, it's solid, almost at 6 points, and then their loss, not bad at all. They've only lost against Mississippi State and Arkansas, and the Arkansas, I still contest is a really good school. I know they've been kind of falling off the map, but don't sleep on the Razorbacks. I think they're due for a rally. I think they just hit a bit of a speed bump there, but that win over Alabama is going to pay major dividends to them. So we'll see how that plays out. Moving on to Baylor. Baylor ranked number 16, number 18 here, so only 2-spot difference. Beating BYU, which was a huge win. So they had a bye week, but I can't stress enough how big that BYU win is for Baylor. Straight schedule, a little bit on the weak side. Big 12's a solid conference. I think it's just some of the games that are hurting them would be, the playing against a Division II school, playing against Texas State, playing against Kansas. Some of those can afford because they play in conference. But yeah, Baylor putting it quietly to another team like that, surprising people having a really good season. I think that could be a challenge for Oklahoma. We'll see. A team that I always have to go into depth and explain. Not as much this week. Oregon's definitely closing the gap because they had a huge win over UCLA. A game I gotta say, if you guys follow my channel at all, you'll know that I am a massive, massive UCLA fan, and it absolutely infuriates me when you have games like this where it shouldn't have been close. It should have never been a close game, and it was just just penalties keeping Oregon's drives alive. 2 picks that were overturned by stupid penalties. The missed field goal, of a stupid botched or block punt. It was just we did everything possible to keep Oregon in that game. It should not even been close, but I mean, I can only rant so long. The Oregon Ducks, they got us. They got us again. I think since what I've been a UCLA fan, I think I've only seen us beat Oregon, I think 3 times ever. So yeah, they've had our number, unfortunately, and they got us again. Not deserved, but they won. And the reason that Oregon is dropped so low is, can't stress enough, how bad that loss to Stanford was. If you look at the loss production index, right? 8.57. If you compare it to all these other teams we've covered, look at all their losses, all in the 4s, 5s, as high as almost 7, right? But Oregon at 8. So I mean, this loss was bad. The Pac-12, with the exception of really just Oregon and UCLA and Arizona State, there's only a handful of teams there, is really, really bad. I cannot stress enough also how bad the Pac-12 is playing this season. They are. We'll see, if they can recover in their bowl games, and kind of move up as a whole, as a conference. But just having a terrible year. So having that loss, I know that they're in the in the top 10. We'll see what the playoff committee sees. I think the playoff committee will probably drop them because, just look at some of these. They struggled against Cal. They beat an 0-7 Arizona, which we did as well, right? FCS school. They're really just hanging their hat on that Fresno State and Ohio State win, and now us. But that loss against Stanford is just terrible. They really should. Oregon is really, really overrated. I just think they're hanging too much on that Ohio State win, which was a great win, but the Pac-12 being as bad as it is, and them losing to Stanford. Can't stress enough. I know I keep repeating myself, but can't stress enough how overrated Oregon is. And I'm not saying that because I'm bitter. I've been saying that for weeks leading up to the game. A game that I felt we should have won. So, they shot. That was a big jump. They were ranked number 23 last week on here, but they'll probably close the gap. I'm really curious how the playoff committee is going to treat them. I really think they're going to drop them. I just don't see it. You got one win to hang your hat on, but everything else you've done your resume. It's just not good. Okay, Kentucky. I told you there'd be a trend here. Kentucky ranked number 16 on here, ranked number 12. And this is what's funny, is Kentucky wasn't even on the map until, I was bringing it up. I'm like, no, they're good. They're good. Look at their VPI. Look at the wins they're putting together. This should be a top 25. This should be, like a top 10 and whatever highs they win, right? And then I know that they lost against Georgia, but they go from being very underrated to now being, when we're talking about a 4-spot difference, but being a little overrated, But everything about Kentucky is great, their VPI is solid. If you're in the 5s, that's solid. stat. If and their only loss, look, I mean, they really just didn't even put a dent in their loss. And we're talking about the number one team in the country that beat you. So, yeah, I mean, they had a bye week. We'll see what Kentucky does, moving forward. But, yeah, I kept telling you guys, Kentucky was a real deal. And now you're seeing that, and now they're being overrated. So I don't know what to say anymore. It's fine. Team that really surprised me that's moving up really slowly. Bit underrated, but they are undefeated, and that's with SMU. Now you might be looking at this like, well, hold on. They have the weakest strength of schedule in college football, right? They have the fifth weakest strength of production. I get that. And look at this, 4.33, the VPI. That's, it's really low. But they're undefeated, and these wins add up. They don't have any losses to hurt them, and you can only play teams ahead of you. So, it's a slow climb. But again, because these wins are so weak, if they were to lose playing in the American Athletic Conference, depending on who they lose against, could give them severely drop them off the map. Just kind of like Coastal Carolina just dropped off the map on here. With a loss, same thing could happen to SMU. It's really thin ice. They're playing on when you have the schedule that you do. So, but for now, SMU, we're gonna say they're underrated. Not as bad as other weeks, but still, should be ranked a little bit higher. Look at this, another overrated SEC team. Again, only 4 spots. It's not as bad as other years. It's like, especially like Florida for whatever reason. The polls love Florida when they have no business being as high as they are. But Ole Miss, this offense is insane. I mean, I don't like Lane Kiffin, but maybe he's onto something with his, offensive mind. A lot of people picked LSU to beat them. I was kind of surprised by that. I think because LSU was kind of having a bounce back. Really good VPI. Only lost to Alabama. That's why their loss per game is really low. Top 20 strength production. Strength schedule, middle of the road. Not good or not bad. It's just right there, dead center. But it shocks me that playing the SEC that you have such a bad defense and such a good offense, and that formula seems to work. Same thing with Iowa. Like, really, that playing the conference they do, playing against the teams they do, to have that sort of layout and to have that sort of success really surprises me. But, a little overrated, but not by much. Speaking of overrated, this one's hard to speak on because we're looking at Ohio State, which, they're 6-1, great, right? You have to look at a few things here. So strength schedule, really good, 33. Strength production, middle of the road. The wins, the value of each one of their wins, really good. When the highest we've seen out of all these, I think Minnesota might be the only one that with the higher what we've seen so far. That Oregon loss really hurts them. I understand that Oregon in the AP polls is ranked number 7, but you have to see them from the resume that they have here. And even though Oregon's a top 25 team, that loss really hurts Ohio State, which every week they've gone up. They're continuing to move the rankings here, but you'll see how tight it is in the top 10, why it's hard to put them as a top 10 team. So that's why they're 8 spots back. So I don't want to say they're necessarily overrated, but you combine that loss and then you look at some of their wins. I mean, Indiana, weak. Maryland is okay. Rutgers, weak. Akron, weak. Tulsa, weak. That Minnesota one was good. But it's the combination a few of those things why Ohio State just can't quite get into the top 10 here. But they will. I think they continue to win. They will, especially when they face Michigan. I think that game's going to have a huge impact, and you'll see why in a little bit. Moving on to Oklahoma State. And let's compare here. You might say, well, how is Oklahoma State, who just lost and dropped 7 spots, they're number 15 in the AP polls, and we're saying they're should be they're a little underrated. And let's compare that to like Ohio State, right? comparable. Victory production index 6.25 to 6.25. What separates these two teams alone is just that one loss. We're saying that the loss to Oregon is worse than Oklahoma State's loss to Iowa State. That's what we're saying. So, and you might be saying, well, Oregon is definitely better than Iowa State. You may be right on that, but this calculation, what we're looking at is what comes into it is your opponents and opponents' opponents. And the opponents' opponents of Iowa State are better the opponents that Oregon are facing. So because the Pac-12 is so weak and then the Big 12 is so much stronger, that's what you're seeing in here because that's being calculated, and that's why the Iowa State loss is not a bad loss when you compare Iowa State, which is 5-2, and let's look at the Big Ten. Let's see how far back Iowa State is. Iowa State not that far behind, number 34, so not a terrible team, but yeah, it's because we're looking at the opponent's record. And that's why that loss is just slightly better than Ohio State. That's what separates these two teams. I know, not fun. But at least we have an understanding why it's that way. You may not agree with it, but that's what the numbers are showing. And again, as Oklahoma continues to win, Ohio State. I'm getting confused here. As Ohio State continues to win, that loss to Oregon is going to continue to be minimized. And they have plenty of tough teams that they're going to start facing. So don't worry, Ohio State fans. Trust me, you are going to shoot up in these rankings. We're just saying, as of now, with the resume you have, you're not there, but you will be if you continue to win because you have a brutal schedule ahead of you. And you might be losing your mind now. Okay, it's like maybe I understand why Oklahoma State is ranked higher than Ohio State, but how the freak is UTSA? Look at this victory production index per game, right? 4. Probably the lowest of any of these teams we've covered, right? But again, wins have values. Those teams have played 7 games, and they've only won 6 of those 7, right? So they 6-1. We're saying University of Texas San Antonio, even though the strength of schedule is weak, even though the strength of production weak, we're saying because they have 2 more wins, and they don't have a loss, even though these wins are weak, they're adding up. And because of that, we're putting them at number 11. Now, keep a few things in mind. Again, we're looking at the value of each one of these games. If Ohio State or Oklahoma State had the same amount of games played, right? So let's say they're 7-1, they'd be ranked ahead. But you have to ask yourself, how many of UTSA's wins are worth the same as like Oklahoma State or Ohio State win? And what we're basically saying here is that about almost 1.25 for every win that that Oklahoma State or Ohio State get, right? They're 6.25 versus the 4.05. We're saying that it's almost it's about 50% more is what we're saying, just about. So we're saying that for every for every win that those teams have, it's valued 50% more than UTSA's wins. But because UTSA has played more games and they've accumulated more wins that way, that's why UTSA is ranked higher. Again, if they play the same amount, if they're both of all 3 teams were 8-0, it wouldn't be close. UTSA would not be numbers ranked as high as they are, even though they said, looking at those numbers, it's simply because they accumulated wins. Again, and I always want to stress this: if they lose because their schedule is so weak, they would fall off the map. But understand that we're saying that each of these games have value. So how many more wins would a small school, like let's say, in this case, Texas San Antonio, have to win to be equivalent to 1 game of a big school? And that's what we're saying. We're saying that it's the bigger school's wins are worth 50% more than this smaller school, at least for the 2 that we're comparing it to. And it'll get real interesting when we're getting briefed up that team I really want to talk about pretty soon. Okay, Iowa. They had a bye week. They looks like they moved up a few spots. So we're only talking one spot difference. So I find it interesting that there's such a huge discrepancy, right, with the rankings I have with like UTSA, right, and but all these other teams, you notice they're pretty close. I mean, at the bottom, there's a few teams that are unranked that I would argue that should be ranked, and I think there's reasonable argument. But then you have a team like this, UTSA, that really kind of breaks the mold of everybody else, and is like people going like how they ranked and who they're ranked ahead of, right? But everything else is pretty consistent. The only inconsistency really we're saying is with like Ohio State and Oregon, which are ranked a lot higher than AP polls. But outside of that, so a lot of the other teams are pretty close, right? When I'm talking about one spot difference. And I think the difference is that the math here is consistent because, again, I don't have any personal input into this, and this is strictly data driven. So there's consistency, at least to my end, and yeah, I just find that really fascinating. But anyways, jumping into Iowa, a team that it blows my mind that they won as many games as they did. I mean, it doesn't not surprise me at all that they lost Purdue because again, I've been saying Purdue's a good team, and it just doesn't make sense how a team could have a top in this case 12 defense, but like such a terrible offense and play in the Big Ten and win 6 games, and I just like that formula. It's just you have a bad defensive night, or you get exposed on defense. You're done because you don't have the offense to defeat. So just it blows my mind that they've won as much as they did. Look at this, the victory per game is their points is really high, almost 7, right? That loss they had, it's bad, but not the worst you could have against Purdue. Again, I argue Purdue is a good team, but look, strength 28, strength production, yeah, definitely should still be a top 10 team. So I'm glad they are. And I'm glad they moved up those 2 spots. Another team I'm sure it gets cheesed for because, Alabama, the gold standard, of course they'll be, never a top 3 teams. Of course they're in the playoff conversation. And they are. And, they have the strength of production that's really high, top 8. But look at their strength of schedule, guys. They are number 66. How do you justify? And look at their victory production. Okay, let's do some compare and contrast here, right? So let's forget about UTSA. Let's just look at Iowa, right? Has a way more impressive schedule. Look at the strength of schedule. Look at their victory points per game. And look at their loss per game, right? Where, yes, that loss against Texas A&M, not as bad as the Purdue loss, but the wins are nowhere near as high, right? The quality of wins, we're saying, of Iowa are way higher, 6.72 versus a whole point higher. And again, even though the production they're playing against some top notch offensive defenses, the strength schedule is still middle of the road compared to Iowa. So again, looking at these 2 teams, remember Iowa was a top 3 team. How do you say that with that loss that Iowa had? I understand this was against Purdue, was a worse loss. Very fair to say that. But why is Iowa punished way more than Alabama? They both play major conferences. Again, it's just the name. And you have to be consistent. You have to play. If you're saying that Iowa is a really bad school, or not that they're a bad school, they had a really bad loss against Purdue, but they had bigger games, and then you have Alabama that plays way worse, schedule. So far, obviously, there's still big games to play for them, and they have a not as bad loss. Why are they being treated so differently than AP polls? It just doesn't make sense. But anyways, Alabama, we're saying top 10 team, definitely should be in the playoff conversation, just should not be number 9. And here's the funny thing: if you didn't follow these rankings, Alabama was unranked to start off the season in these VPI rankings and had to slowly climb up, right? And now they're closing the gap, and you're seeing that. I've said that since day one. The more data you collect, the closer it's going to represent, closer and closer to these AP ranks. So you're going to start seeing the small shifts and teams where they're like maybe they're a little overrated, a little underrated, right? And you're seeing that it's close, guys. We're getting really close. But again, the SEC always not one of these teams has been ranked ahead of where they are in the AP polls. With every SEC team, they're always overrated. And that's what I'm trying to prove here. So as we go into that great rant, right? Now we go into San Diego State. And check this out, right? So we're seeing Alabama, middle of the road strength of schedule. Then you go into San Diego State, and they have this terrible strength of schedule, right? They have this terrible strength of production. Their victory production per game is pretty close to Alabama, was ironic enough, right? Alabama's is, about half a point higher than San Diego State. But why on God's green earth would San Diego State be not only a top 10 team, but why the heck would rank them against Alabama, right? Because they're number 21 in the AP polls. Why would be the discrepancy? Again, adding up these wins, we're saying that the quality of the wins that San Diego State is producing is close to Alabama, right? But we're also saying that if you add them up, they've won one more game now. They're 7-0. They haven't lost. They're not being hurt by anything, and they're winning 7 versus Alabama, who's won 7, but is being hurt by that one loss. We're saying that San Diego State should be ranked ahead because they haven't lost. They don't have a loss that's hurting them, even though the quality of their wins is slightly worse than Alabama. Not by much. It's that one win. You subtract that. You take those points loss and you subtract it from your score, and that's why San Diego State just edges them out. But again, because they play the Mountain West, because they play such a weak strength schedule, San Diego State loses. Believe me, boys and girls, they would drop, and they would drop hard. But it's a very slow climb, and it's been consistent. San Diego State didn't start off as a top 10 team. They have to slowly climb up that ladder, and that's what they're doing. So we'll see if they keep that up. Cincinnati. Interesting, because Cincinnati is ranked number 2 in the AP polls. And this is what kind of same thing I was saying with like San Diego State, right? Let's compare these two teams, right? We're saying San Diego State, the quality of their wins are 5.08, right? We're saying Alabama's 5.65. Look, Cincinnati 5.43, right? So the quality wins are all pretty similar, within half a point of each other. Strength of schedule, way worse than Alabama. Strength of production, way worse. But again, it's because they don't have that one loss that's hurting them. But you treat Cincinnati in the AP polls higher than Alabama, right? But if this team is comparable to San Diego State, how do you have Cincinnati ranked number 2? How do you have San Diego State ranked number 21? And how do you have Alabama, who has a similar resume to Iowa, ranked number 3? How does any of this make sense? This is what I'm always trying to point out. I'm losing my mind here. Like, they call me madman with these stupid rankings. I get it. But when looking at the numbers, how did those 4 circumstances all work out the way they do? I don't know. I don't have an answer. I don't know the thought process. That's what I do. I absolutely love this. I love diving into the numbers, and my goodness, it feels great when you're this late in the season, look at these numbers, because now you have a foot to stand on. Now you really get to expose just the ludicrousy of these rankings, right? Because early in the weeks you don't have enough data, so you have these massive shifts in rankings, but now because you have more and more games being played, the shifts are so much smaller. They're not as drastic, and yeah, it's when you're able to validate a lot of your data, because so many of these rankings are close to what the AP polls, but there's specific teams because of the name they have are treated way differently. I just how do you make sense of that? How do you make sense of San Diego State having a similar resume to Cincinnati being ranked so low? How do you have Alabama have a similar resume to Iowa ranked so much higher? Why is Cincinnati ranked so high when you're not respecting San Diego State? None of this makes sense. But it makes sense here, but not in the AP polls. Okay, let's try to keep this going. We are now at Michigan State, ranked number 6, number 8 in the AP polls. Again, Big Ten is strong. And another And just to throw another wrench in here, right? Where you guys, were saying that, like, look at the strength schedule, right? For in strength production, obviously, is way higher with Michigan State, but look at your strength schedule alone, right? 108, Cincinnati, 123, right? So Michigan State strength schedule is really bad, even though they play in the Big Ten. Strength production solid. Look at the quality of the wins. The exact same as not Alabama, almost the exact same as Cincinnati, right? 7-0. But we're saying Michigan State number 6. So consistent in the AP polls, right? Only about 2 spots difference. How are you justifying any of this? How I ask this. Whew. Anyways, not much more to say to Michigan State. Just putting together a good season, being undefeated. I think that surprised a lot of people. So yeah, absolutely deserve to be a top 10 team. Okay. And you might be wondering, well, Oregon is, what's Oregon's resume compared to number 7 here, right? 5.43. Yeah, if we look at Oregon, why are they so much back? Yeah, higher. Again, that was a bad loss against Stanford. You subtract that from your total points, and that's why Oregon is so far low, and I just don't think they'll recover. Oklahoma. All right, this is where the fun begins. I've been teasing this, right? Look at this, guys. I've been saying all season how overrated Oklahoma is. Yes, I understand that they are a top 5 team here, and again, it's almost to be treated the same as a small school. Where look at some of these small schools. Let's go back to like UTSA, right? UTSA, 4 points for each one of their wins, right? Going to, let's say, SMU, 4.33, right? SMU 7-0. And look at their, really like the worst strength schedule and worst strength production. Now we'll go back to Oklahoma, right? Look at this strength schedule, absolute garbage. Strength production, okay. Their victory per game, on the higher end. But again, they played 8 games. They've won 8 in a row. If they played 7 games, it'd be a lot lower. If they're comparing to a lot of these schools, they would be around, number 10. They'd be a little overrated there. But it's because they're accumulating wins against a bunch of weak teams. And come on, guys, look at this. Tulane, Division II school, right? I know Nebraska's struggling, losing record. West Virginia losing record. The only teams they beat with winning records is Texas, which was a really good win. I want to stress that. And Kansas State. But then look at this. TCU loses record. Then you beat Kansas, which is an absolute terrible team. So yeah, I'm telling you guys. Yeah, I get they're number 5 here. But if Oklahoma loses 1 game, they should fall off the map. It's hard to say a team's overrated when they're number 5 on here. But it just how they got there it's the same way Cincinnati got there, playing the weaker conference, the same way that UTSA is being treated on here. You have to look at them as almost like a small school playing a weak conference that's accumulating wins. That's how Oklahoma's getting there. They're not the Oklahoma you think they are. And a lot of the close games they're having, I think, are really showing that because there's a lot of games they should have been losing. Enough about Oklahoma. Just getting frustrated with them. Going into Notre Dame. Notre Dame, probably the most underrated team that we have ranked, right? And let's look at that. Like what? This is really interesting to me. So going with let's say we're comparing them to Alabama. I think the Alabama one's great, right? Because Notre Dame we're seeing number 4, Alabama ranked number 3, and the people's number 9 here, right? Look at the difference here. 5.65 value per games, right? Notre Dame 7. Look, strength of schedule 10, strength of production 4. It's absolutely brutal, right? Just beat USC. Their only loss is against an undefeated Cincinnati team, 4.38, right? Where we're saying that Texas A&M loss was a little bit worse. Really comparable, but it's really the quality, right? Look at the strength schedule, 66. That's why their quality of wins isn't as high as Notre Dame. Basically, Notre Dame is the most underrated school in college football. I think they're being punished way too hard for that loss against Cincinnati. You've punished, what's called Kentucky. So much for playing against the number 1 school, and number 2 school here was punished, I think, worse. So yeah, Notre Dame should be a top 4 school. I don't even like them. I understand that. I cannot stand Notre Dame, but the most underrated school in college football. I lied about that. I lied. I completely forgot. The most underrated school in college football is not Notre Dame. In fact, it is Wake Forest. Here's why, my friends. Yeah, I get strength schedule garbage. 99. Strength production pretty good. Top 45. Look at their VPI, very big per game, right? 55.95, 97, almost a 6, right? Who's that better than? That's better. We're saying that's better than Oklahoma, way better than Oklahoma. We're saying that's better than Michigan State. We're saying that's better than Cincinnati. We're saying that's better than San Diego State. We're saying that's better than Alabama. We're saying that's not as good as Iowa. But all this team, they're better UTSA and a few of these guys, right? So we're saying that Wake Forest, I understand playing the ACC, right? Not a great conference. But because they've won 7 in a row, because, the quality of some of these teams, no one standout game, just a solid schedule around, right? Look at this. They only have played, 3 of their teams were against with losing records, right? Well, we're saying the FCS schools, we treat them as winless teams, but Old Dominion and Florida State. Other than that, Virginia, really good win, right? Virginia is probably an underrated school. Louisville, solid win. Syracuse, 500, not terrible. Army, good win. So yeah, understanding how we break down the other teams, applying that same method to Wake Forest, being the best team in the ACC. Yeah, we're saying they're top 3. You saw it here first. Will they win out? No, I don't see it. But yeah, or should they be a top 10 team? Absolutely. I think Power 5 school, undefeated, solid resume, being really undervalued because, again, they're Wake Forest. If we're going to give Cincinnati the number 2 ranking, how do you not give Wake Forest, who plays a tougher schedule, is undefeated, a higher ranking than Cincinnati? Again, stay consistent. You can't rank Cincinnati that high without looking at Wake Forest, which we could all agree has a tougher schedule, right? I understand that Cincinnati beat Notre Dame, but aside from that win, look at their schedule as a whole. Wake Forest, better. Yeah, 108 cinch schedule to, no comparison, guys. Michigan lost their throne to the number 1 spot on these VPI rankings, right? Moving up really nicely in the AP polls, number 6, and does not surprise me at all. I mean, again, top 25 strength schedule and strength production. Look at this victory per game, right? 7 points. That's ridiculous. Undefeated. Again, I always want to bring up Wisconsin is very underrated, and you're seeing that. How is 4-3 team have such a high score here, the 13 points, right? Nebraska's not good. Yeah, Northwestern's not good, but they also beat Northern Illinois, underrated team. They beat Western Michigan, underrated team. There's a lot of underrated teams that they beat, and that's why their score is so high. And also because they haven't played an FCS school like a lot of other schools have. That's another reason they're being rewarded for that. So yeah, it's starting to reflect in the AP polls. We reflected it here first, and now starting to reflect in the AP polls. So we were ahead of the curve there. Total offense number 35, total defense number 11. I mean, they have all the makings to really make a push to the playoffs. So, really curious how, if they both win out with them in Ohio State, how it plays out. But loving those Michigan Wolverines. And finally, with the clear number 1, undisputed, finally taking their throne, the Georgia Bulldogs, right? Cannot understate how big that win over Kentucky was, right? Their biggest win of the season by far, not even close. You might be thinking, what about Auburn? Forget Auburn. What about Arkansas? Forget Arkansas. What about Clemson? Forget those Tigers. What about UAB? Forget UAB. South Carolina, not even worth mentioning. Georgia is the only accurately rated team that I have here. The only one that matches. Georgia number 1 here, Georgia number 1 in the AP polls. By a lot. And I'm really curious, because they play FCS school late in the season, how that's going to affect them here in the rankings, when assuming they win, which obviously they should, but you never know. That's why you play the game, right? But it's interesting how they got here. because they weren't ranked number one every week, but they took a stronghold. Especially a team I don't think people expected to be as big as when it was, but it was. Kentucky was a massive win. But yeah, the only accurate ranked team that I have, because every other SEC team was ranked higher. And believe me, if there was more spots that had to be ranked, Georgia would still be overrated. But they're accurately rated. They are the best team in the nation. All the other SEC teams, you see, I'm not very over, just a few spots overrated, but they always gets 2 or 3 spots overrated where they should be. I feel like consistently, they're consistently overrated. Sorry, let's get off that. Let's give Georgia the moment. Georgia Bulldogs, they're one team in the nation. We'll see if they keep that going. And yeah, coming off a bye week, we'll see what they do. But that's it, guys. Thank you guys for tuning in. Catch me next week. I try to sneak in here once a week to talk about these rankings. So we'll see if we have any major changes. And if UCLA climbs into the doghouse, we have a pretty big win against Utah. Or a pretty big game against Utah, which Utah is favored to win. Really surprising that. So we'll see how that plays out. But thank you guys all for watching. Please give me a follow here on Twitch. This is my main platform. And we'll have some live discussions as some people start to trickle in and start wanting to talk some college football. So looking forward to that. But thank you all, and I will see you guys next week. Good night, everybody.